My name is Rich Johnston, and I make Bleeding Cool.
Welcome to I Made This from Do Anything Media, a show about passionate people executing their big ideas in realistic ways you can learn from to make your own big idea a reality. I'm Bill Meeks, and before we get started, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us for our Mega Pack premiere week last week with 5 super duper awesome creative interviews. Moving forward, for now, we're going to be releasing 1 episode per week, usually on Wednesdays. Now today, I'm talking with Rich Johnston from BleedingCool.com. Rich has been reporting on comic book rumors since around 1994. Before his current gig at Bleeding Cool, he wrote the comic book gossip column Lying in the Gutters for Comic Book Resources, which is where I discovered him. I'll be talking to Rich today about his entertainment and comic book news website, BleedingCool.com. A site known for breaking comic book news stories before DC Comics or Marvel Comics ever puts out a press release. Bleeding Cool also covers other stuff, like TV and movies and video games and whatnot. It's a site I check out pretty much every day. Way back in the day, I reported on Dragon Con in Atlanta, Georgia for Bleeding Cool for a couple years. Anyway, it's a big site with a bit of a reputation, and we'll get into the controversy and all of that. I think you'll like this one, even if you're not a big fan of comic book and movie news. And like I said, in this episode, we really dig in on the reputation Bleeding Cool has among the comic book industry and Rich's feelings on it. Okay, I made this for you. Take a listen. So let's see here, Rich. You have been writing about, the comic book industry in particular and entertainment in general for a lot of years. I believe you got your start on Usenet. Why don't you tell people what Usenet is?
Sure. Well, before apps, before websites even existed, there was still the internet. And there were message boards, news groups, specifically the Usenet news groups were fairly popular and widespread. When I went to university in about 1992, 1993, I discovered this thing called the internet, which no one knew about at the time. But everyone was using it for looking up documents and getting documents from various libraries around the world, that kind of thing. And I used it to find comic book message boards. And Usenet had message boards for everything, well, pretty much. And there were a small comic book community there, including 1 or 2 comic book professionals. People like Peter David were active there at the time. And so I thought, oh, this sounds fun. I'll join in and, try and make a name for myself. At the time, I'd been thinking, because comics didn't have a gossip column. I was interested in lots of media, and every single industry, certainly in Britain at least, whether from media to politics to carpentry to second-hand car salesmen, they all had kind of like trade magazines with kind of gossip columns about the industry. And I thought, well, I could start something like that up. And I used to find little bits and pieces on the internet, and I used to also steal stuff outright from Comics International, a British comic book magazine that wasn't really read in the States. And so I used to just nick a few things and then put a few things together and then start things to come through. And I started to write a little kind of a gossip column and call it. At the time, I think it was either something like Rich's Revelations or Rich's Rumours. I was young. I wanted to put my name in the title.
Yeah, you had to build that cred.
Yeah, and then it just started becoming a regular thing, and some people liked it and some people didn't. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, more people who liked it than didn't. And that magazine that I used to initially steal stuff from, they started stealing stuff from me, which was great. But that was one of my Des Skin, and we came to an arrangement. And basically, I would write bits and pieces for Comics International based on what I was writing online. And that's I started to leave university and started to go to work. And the only place you could get online were internet cafes or at work. So I generally worked at companies that had online access, which was handy.
You weren't worried about salary. You just wanted to make sure you had that online access.
I was an advertising radio copywriter for Metro FM in Newcastle, and they had an online access. And I found this was true of lots of advertising agencies. So I thought, right, advertising for me, because I can do advertising. I'm good at that. And I can get access onto this thing called the internet. And before you knew it, suddenly you could start to get it in your home as well, which was in the UK till about more mid-late 90s.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty similar to what America was too. Like, I remember getting online for the first time in like 95, 96, something like that.
Yeah, I was already there, mate. So, I was waiting for you. But the thing, that's about the time we started getting websites. I think that's about the time when Mozilla had Netscape. That feels about right about then, or whatever it was before then. And so there was starting to have a bit more of a structure to what the internet was, or it could be. I'd been self-publishing comic books. I was also using the internet to publicize my comics before anybody else really was.
Like little ash cans or something like that, or?
I actually self-published magazines. Thankfully, I met this guy, comics. I met this guy called Mike Meyer, no relation, in the States. And we kind of set up something called Twist and Shout Comics. And so I started publishing early comic books of mine, a series called Dirtbag, a more successful series called The X-Flies, which, thank God, that Diamond once ordered thinking it was the X-Files because they put a typo on the thing.
I was going to say that almost sounds like a satirical X-Files thing.
Well, it was a bit, but with flies, insect-based. It's a bit of an anthology magazine, lots of different kind of cartoon strips from me and a few friends. And then one issue, Diamond listed it in their order catalogue as X-Files, and it was ordered as X-Files. And so we got 30,000 orders, which was very nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then obviously Diamond had to eat them all because it was their mistake, because we printed them, we sent them off. They went, hang on, this is not what we... Oh, I see what we did here.
It's too late, Diamond.
Sorry, Diamond. Sorry about that, but that did help fund me flying off to San Diego Comic-Con for about 3 or 4 years. So thanks for that. That's kind of where the money went. But yeah, so I was using it. So I was using the column to like publicize my work, but then it started to get a bit more popular, and people started to want it. So first of all, we made a jump to a Twist and Shout Comics website for it, at which point I think it was then called Rich's Rumours. And then a website made an offer, Silver Bullet Comic Books. They said, do that, but do it for us. And that became All the Rage, which is basically the same thing. Another website wanted it. So actually, probably came before that was something called the Gutter Press, which was from a website called Next Planet Over. And this is going back to the really geekiest times when the first geek companies thought, we can make money off the internet. We'll just put a website and everyone will go there. And it'd be great. And then they went bankrupt eventually, I think. It was my editor for that was Eric Stevenson. So he was my editor on the Gutter Press until, I think, about 4 weeks in, when I think a few comic book professionals, possibly Kurt Busiek and Mark Wade, I couldn't swear to it, said, we'll boycott you if you keep employing Rich Johnston, because I did have a bit of a reputation back then, I have to say, because I was the gossip columnist and I would run stories that weren't ready for press releases yet. And
generally, people who are featured in gossip columns aren't too big of a fan of gossip columns.
Sometimes it's changed over the years, but it's true. Not everyone has that gene, should we put it that way? So yes, then it went to Silver Bullet Comic Books, it became All the Rage for a while, but then I kind of liked the idea of getting paid for what I was doing. Naturally. So that's when CBR, Comic Book Resources, said, we'll basically pay for your comics every week, pretty much. And I was working in advertising at the time, so I was doing quite well. Didn't actually need it to survive on. And then about 10 years ago, I suddenly did need it to survive on, because that's when the big nasty recession came along, and all the advertising agencies in London and around fired all their writers overnight. Oh, wow. And there was nothing. It was insane. William Christensen of Avatar Press, they published one of my comic books a couple of years earlier. He was saying, that thing you do every weekend that everyone seems to read that I don't really understand, why don't you come and do it for me, but 4 times a day? And that's what Bleeding Cool was. It was me writing about 4 times a day, initially as like a part-time thing, and he was basically paying my mortgage, which was really useful at the time, because I just had a second kid and suddenly I couldn't get any work, and it was looking quite grim. That then has expanded. I was doing some part-time advertising work at the time. That's no time for that these days. Bleeding Cool started to take on other people. Wasn't just the Rich Johnston show. So we had other writers like Warren Ellis was writing for a while, Cy Spurrier. And then we started getting more people writing films, Brennan Connolly and his friends, and then games, and then TV. And now we've got a huge host of people. Even the likes of Jude Terra, who is well named.
And you've had a lot of stringers too. Like, full disclosure, I reported on Dragon Con for Bleeding Cool for a number of years.
Well, we always love people going to the shows to write for Bleeding Cool. That was always a good thing, because I couldn't get to all the shows, certainly, especially not living in the UK. But lots of people could, and we could get them into things and events and shows and the like. And it was fun. People seem to enjoy it, and now quite a few of them have become like full-time writers for Bleeding Cool.
From my perspective, going out and covering something for Bleeding Cool, it was so nice because, I was local to Atlanta where Dragon Con took place. And so it was, just hop in the car and go down there, and I got free admission because I was there for press. And then I got to go and talk to like Burt Ward and Adam West and everybody. It was a great time.
Of course, some people, I was going to say mention no names, but no. Let's mention Donnie Cates, who was a stringer for Bleeding Cool. He was writing from C to E2 for Bleeding Cool, so he got free access. And then what he did was I think he wrote about 1 or 2 articles, and then just spent the entire show just trying to get work off comic book publishers.
Oh, wow.
I had to fire him. So, yeah, I had to fire Donnie Cates. But, he hasn't totally held it against me, which is very kind of him. Again, Bleeding Cool has opened doors for all sorts of people over the years, which is always good to hear.
Oh, yeah. The stuff I did for Bleeding Cool was sort of very informative for me as a presenter and a host. It was before, I got into podcasting and everything. So it really gave me a good chance to kind of get out there and interact with people and talk to them and have a really bad interview with Billy West from Futurama.
Get out. In a world where people walk in your room when you're being interviewed.
Okay, I think that's a good time to start, isn't it? It's okay for the background noise.
Don't worry about that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm Bill Meeks. I'm here at DragonCon 2012, and I'm here with Billy West. You might know him as the voice of Ren, Stimpy, Fry, Zoidberg from Futurama. I believe you're an M&M or two.
Wait, I'm going to yell at somebody. Hey, Twinkle Toes, could you shut the door? Don't worry about it.
I think because when I got to DragonCon, the press people told me, if you have an interview set up with a celebrity, maybe go around in the room where they're doing autographs and just be like, hey, I'm Bill from Bleeding Cool and I'm going to be interviewing you tomorrow. Nice to meet you. And so I went to do that with Billy West and he just got like really down and dour. I got the impression that maybe Bleeding Cool had done a story about a friend of his or something that he wasn't too fond of.
It's possible. not everyone. It's not always the most positive name to drop, but it's useful.
Yeah.
Some people like it. Some people are scared of it. I'll take either. Either will do me.
As long as they know it, that's the important part, right?
Indeed.
Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit because, there are these controversies and, Bleeding Cool gets name checked at panels at San Diego, people speaking disparagingly online.
Well, disparaging, it depends. Again, it's like one man's ceiling is another man's floor. I think it was Tom Brevoort was complaining when we were running the stuff about Isaac Perlmutter cancelling the Fantastic Four comics and all this, and he was going, honestly, would anyone even know about any of this if it wasn't for some website stirring it all up? And I was thinking, no, maybe people wouldn't know about it unless it was for a certain website stirring it up. Absolutely. But he might say it's a disparaging term, but I thought, fantastic, so I put that on a T-shirt.
Nice.
Yeah, and occasionally, you'll hear most people will say it in a certain way. Oh, if I say it on here, it'll be on Bleeding Cool in seconds. And they're saying that as if it's a bad thing, and I'm going, no, I'll take it. So so some people's disparaging reputation can actually be very, very useful. Depends what it is.
Oh yeah, and I have seen, I frequent, different social news sites like Reddit and stuff, and I'll see you jump into the comments if someone speaks ill of Bleeding Cool to kind of defend yourself.
Well, I'll like to join in. If there's a specific bit of incorrect piece of information that's incorrect, I'd like to maybe just correct that bit. If someone says they're a terrible website, they're awful, they're scum of the earth, and they don't even pay their contributors, I'll pop in and say, no, we do pay our contributors. I'll leave the rest. That's opinion. That's fine. But it's a very specific point of fact I might have a go at. Just adding to it,
Have you ever heard any bit of criticism about Bleeding Cool that you were like, okay, wait a second, no, I think you have a point here?
Yeah. Oh, lots of times. Specifically when you're writing, a lot of the time you've got blinkered visions. You're doing it from one person's perspective. Sometimes it's really, really useful to see things from another perspective that maybe you didn't have before. So absolutely, I've gone back and changed stuff or removed stuff simply because I've seen a reaction against someone that said, oh no, that's absolutely valid, and I had no idea about that when I was writing it. Here, how quickly can I change things or try and make things right? Absolutely. Yeah, that's something I'll always do.
So, let's go back to, the first couple years of Bleeding Cool a little bit. Did you say it was Avatar? Avatar
Press they own Bleeding Cool, they started Bleeding Cool, they continue to own Bleeding Cool, and they continue to pay me every month.
So did they handle a lot of the logistics, like actually getting the website set up, figuring out what the sections would be, all that stuff?
Oh, I have no idea how to do anything like that. I thankfully have a WordPress thing. That's all I know, and I'm not that great at that either. Yeah, actually, setting up a website now, that's not my skill base. Shall we say? Yeah, so they do all of that, and they have people who do that. And they hire people to do that, and they do it themselves. And
that must be so nice because I have to do all that shit myself.
No, either get someone to hide to do all the fun stuff, or hire someone else to do all the terrible stuff. One of the two. I don't know. But yeah, so every now and then things happen and the site goes down and I have no idea why. I ask, is everything okay? And they go, no, this is all happening. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, using various acronyms and initials. And no, it's not. It's clearly not my skill set. And I have tried, but no. Thankfully, some of the people who work for Bleeding Cool do know a bit more than I do, which is very handy.
Let's go ahead and get into that. The people who do work for Bleeding Cool. You obviously have a team there who helps you out. Yeah. Who are the key people at Bleeding Cool besides yourself?
Okay, well, the editor-in-chief is Caitlin Booth, absolutely, who's someone who came to Bleeding Cool after writing for Bleeding Cool at conventions and shows, and she's absolutely fantastic. She gets everyone working in the right direction. She's the kind of person who'll tell me not to write something, and she does. She's very important. William Christensen and Mark Seifert are the owners of Avatar Press, and they're very involved. Mark, especially on the day-to-day, running the site and working with writers and contributors. In the comic side, we've got Jude Terra, who is a relatively recent addition to the site. We stole him from The Outhouse, which was basically an even more scurrilous website than Bleeding Cool. And he used to say terrible things about me. And basically, Avatar Press gave him a deal. So, hey, come and write all that stuff for us. And you can still be as mean to Twitch if you want. I'm going, what? Really? Okay. No, but again, it's like we hopefully we complement each other. I tell you this, there's certain people who I used to be the bane of their existence, and now I look absolutely glorious in comparison to the Snyder Brony baiting Jude Terra.
So he serves multiple purposes for you.
Absolutely. And then we've got people like Ray Fluke over on television, and we've got Gavin over in games. I mean, there's more kind of people kind of come through all the time, but everyone's got kind of like a section that they kind of work and run. Jeremy is turning for collectibles. I got some messages from him today, and he's a great writer, that kind of thing. Beneath him, they've got a bunch of other writers as well who are all kind of contributing. Some of them who might do 1 or 2 pieces a week, some will do 1 or 2 pieces a day. And we're growing. We're hiring up more people. I've just had a very exciting conversation with someone who would be, if this person came to Bleeding Cool, it would be a news story. So,
oh, wow. So Britney Spears, right?
Absolutely. I mean, but she has an awful lot to say about early 1980s Transformers comics, I think. So maybe she definitely deserves to have a column about that. I don't know. No, not Britney Spears, not yet. Yeah. But if she's willing, if she's available, yeah, I'd talk.
You have all these people doing all this stuff. How does that get approached logistically? Like, is it just a bunch of emails back and forth? Do you use a tool like Slack?
Slack, sir. A very, very busy Slack, split up into all these mini calls. Hey, do you know what? I'll have a look at it right now. You can't see this because you're not allowed.
Yeah.
But I'll be able to look. Okay, so we've got tons of different. There's stuff that there's nothing specifically tagged into me right this second, which is good. Otherwise, I've had to do it. But if I pop into the general section, which is the general thing, I'll have a quick look here. This is, you see, I'm doing it right now. So, people are talking about various media things. Oh, the big Wolverine story, because Jude Terra did a great story about how the X-Men fandom believes that Wolverine has 2 penises.
Oh, wow.
It's been finding evidence for that in the new Wolverine logo that's been released. And that has been a very, very silly article.
That's taking Healing Factor to a whole nother level.
Yeah, and I see. There you go. I would never have written that story. Jude would never have written any other story. So, we do kind of like have different spaces, and we work around that.
There are the multiple penis spaces, and then there are your spaces. Yeah,
exactly. You see, now I've been saying that, but I'm not entirely immune. I mean, I did when the House of X comics started coming out towards the end. I did write something about how Jean, Logan, and Scott were the first superhero throuple based on the various diagrams of their living arrangements that Jonathan Hickman had released. And that was quite fun. I mean, that's kind of my level. I'll go to that level, and then Jude will go further and go, no, that means Wolverine's got 2 dicks. Okay, fine. You can do that bit over there.
Back to the Dragon Con days too. Wasn't there like right before Dragon Con? I'll leave it a little genteel here. Draining your X at Dragon Con, and we'll just leave it at that.
No, the Dragon Con. I mean, these are the days when Craigslist used to have all those great personal adverts, which they don't anymore. And Dragon Con did have a bit of a reputation as a bit of a meat market, I guess, is the colloquial phrase. And I used to go through the Dragon Con personals listings, and blimey, the stuff that would get posted, the photos that would get posted. So I used to kind of compile some of the best of those and cover up anything too naughty with pictures of dragons. So you got lots of men showing off the size of their dragons, and I used to run them as a big list, and that was very popular. Yes, and I would quote, people like dress up as Klingons, and people are like, oh, we're cosplaying as a Klingon. I want people as stormtroopers to cross the franchises, all this kind of stuff going on.
Or just like, I'm going to Dragon Con. It's my big trip. I'm looking for a special dozen people to spend it with.
Pretty much. Yes, and the pictures to match. So generally, I always like the naked photos but while they were still wearing the stormtrooper helmets, not entirely naked. So you see this, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, I can see why that might appeal to a few people.
Well, it was like stormtrooper helmets and socks. For some reason, they had to keep their socks on.
And I have to say, some of the people at Dragon Con, they didn't really like this reputation that they had, but they did have that reputation. So I mean, and I'll tell you this, no other show had Craigslist listings like the ones at Dragon Con. So I'm sorry, it was totally and utterly deserved. I did a few things for San Diego and the like, but it was nothing compared to Dragon Con.
As someone who's been on the ground there like 4 or 5 times, it is. There is that mode. There's like, down on the main floor, and you're like, oh, look, there's a really cool Doctor Who costume, and this, that, and the other. You go up those elevators, you go to a room party. Holy crap! Like, there's
a new use for that long scarf. You find out why it has to be that long suddenly. Yeah. And jelly babies, they should really not go there. They just shouldn't. I mean, that's not how they're designed for.
So let's go back again to, the early days of Bleeding Cool. What was sort of the biggest challenge in trying to figure out what it was going to be and getting it up online and everything for you?
Well, for me, the server going down, it took a while, I think, for Avatar to realize how popular certain stories could be. And so every now and then we have a big story, up it goes, everything comes down. Oh, dear. So occasionally those would happen, but they've been solved these days, I think. But, again, there were earlier versions of interfaces, like WordPress interfaces aren't quite as easy as they are now.
Yeah.
I do remember at one point writing a story on a phone before smartphones were a thing, running across some field about 2 in the night because I had to make some change, and I could do it on this little phone. It took far too long. It was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. It's so much easier these days. iPads, computers, phones. I could do anything and everything on any device I have to hand, which is very handy. So it's more to do with just technology hadn't quite caught up with what blogging was at the time. So
when you started it up, did you bring a big audience over from like Lion in the Gutters and stuff like that from Comic Book Resources?
Yes, Jonah would not give me a link. Jonah at CBR, I could not get a link. The last column was going to do an interview with him. We'd talk about stuff and what I was planning to do, and he just took any mention of Bleeding Cool and a link straight out of that piece. Which, considering that he actually did quite well out of when he got the column, which was originally sort of Wallet Comics. I did a very nice big piece saying where I'd be, and he got a massive big chunk of traffic when that happened.
Yeah.
So when the boot on the other foot, suddenly no. But I can't speak too badly of him. He's now one of the head DC marketing people. He's just lined up there. So
yeah, I saw that.
No, all is forgiven. And I hope you can forgive me for everything as well. All good. I'm sure we've done terrible things to each other over the years since. But how was I?
We were talking about, what was your audience like to begin with, and obviously you weren't able to bring a lot of people over.
Okay, but enough people had heard, and there was enough of a bump. So certainly there was a nice big chunk to start with. But with all these stuff, it's always down to the stories. And at the time, you didn't have a lot of recommendation stuff. I mean, Twitter, Facebook, that really wasn't happening. There's no Reddit, things like these. A lot of things you now think about as places where you find things out and you get directed towards. They weren't there, but you had news groups, you had message boards, and so I kind of jump onto those things and I talk about Bleeding Cool there. I got a bit of a reputation for it. I know, in fact, I had no idea. So it's basically using other people's blogs, and so if you wrote a good story, get picked up by other people's blogs, and they'd send you back. And then you basically just become part of people's day. So they would spend the day when in the office just pressing function 5 to refresh. Again, this is all desktop at this time.
Yeah.
Everyone was just using desktops, all laptops. I have people telling me I've just been pressing function 5 for the last 3 hours and you haven't updated. What is going on? Yeah, I was actually at my other job because I only do this part-time. So I was head writer at a radio studio somewhere in London while also doing Bleeding Cool, and the two must have overlapped a bit. I'm sure I wrote quite a lot of Bleeding Cool while I really shouldn't have been. But it was just trying to keep the wolf from the door at that time. So, and then it's all kind of worked out. But yeah, those are kind of some of the earlier restrictions. It was quite hard to get stuff. But generally, it was pretty much what I've been writing for the last kind of like at that time, the last 15 years at that point. So I just kind of spread it out rather than concentrating it all into one big piece that would go out every Monday morning. I just spread it out over the week and bring in other voices and bring in other things to do. So it wasn't just all about the gossip of the comics industry. I had to find other things to write about as well.
Is your audience primarily British or American, or is it like an even mix? Mostly
American, but definitely British. The British audience bats above its weight. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it's, I mean, like if Britain is a fifth of the audience of America, it makes, I don't know, maybe it's a sixth of the audience of Bleeding Cool, that kind of thing. I'm not quite sure on the actual details, but I have to always be aware of the American audience. That's my main thing, and I certainly write to that time scale. I'll mostly be writing during American primetime hours, as it were. Although if they've got a very British story, that might run a bit earlier.
What do you think is the biggest story Bleeding Cool has ever broken?
Oh, all right. I'll go through a few, and maybe you can tell me what you think. I think when we ran details of all the main characters in Star Wars Force Awakens before anyone. That did very well. I know that was a massive, huge thing. We just basically ran. So we didn't know they were called Rey or Finn or Poe then, but we knew what kind of characters they were going to be. So we ran a whole bunch of those. That was good ones from the film side. From the comic side, I mean, all the big like DC events and stuff, they've always kind of come through on Bleeding Cool first. We're doing something called 5G at the moment, which I think will be big. A year ago, we broke the story that Batman was about to get his penis out and on panel, and that went everywhere. That kind of took down huge entire imprints at DC Comics. So
yeah, I was going to say, I think eventually that penis went back into the tights, right?
Absolutely. So that had to have one. But I mean, things, there are big stories that I don't think got any attention at the time. I think we only got a few thousand reads for when we broke the story that Amazon was buying Comixology about a month before it happened. Now, for me, that was a massive story.
Oh yeah,
everyone seemed to, no one seemed to care at the time, but I thought that was huge. And of course, since then, it's become huger. Certain ones have caused problems for people. I know when we ran the news that DC Comics was moving to Burbank before they told anyone at New York, kind of stuff. That was very interesting. And I got lots of people condemning me for how dare I run this story before the DC PR company has done their job, kind of stuff.
Was it the grunts at DC condemning you, or was it the management?
Oh, no, it wasn't the grunts at DC. No, it was just people around the kind of place.
Oh, okay.
No, I was just reminded of that because of the passing of Tom Spurgeon just the other day. It was very sad. Mm-hmm. And Tom used to give me some great words of encouragement over these days, and that was one I always will remember, because when I was getting so much grief from so many people for running this story, he kind of sent me messages saying, yeah, you don't worry, mate, you're doing what a reporter does. Mm-hmm. That kind of stuff. And so coming from the comics reporter, as it were, yeah. I mean, things that were big. I mean, things like the New 52, that was a big thing. We didn't know that was what it was called at the time, but running that kind of stuff was good. Also big from Marvel side, I think it had to be I mentioned before, the Ike Perlmutter stories about how he's involved in basically banning Fantastic Four and reducing X-Men titles at Marvel. Mm-hmm. That ran and ran. There were so many different iterations of that, and I always really like the ones where people say, no, that can't be true, that absolutely can't be true, and then 2 years later everyone knows it's true. That was when we ran story after story pointing out all the different details of how this was affecting the company and how these decisions were being made, and it was slated all over the place. And then about 2 years later, Jonathan Hickman, who was writer of the Fantastic Four at the time, comes out and goes, yeah, I mean, everyone knows that's true now, don't they? And stuff. It's kind of like, yeah, well, we do.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's definitely a temptation there to, when that happens, to put a big article out, we were right.
Oh, absolutely. Temptation? I succumb every time. There was a great one when we did a big story about how Marvel was cancelling the Inhumans movie. And because I got that was at New York Comic Con after someone, a very a person I can't mention, but who approached me at a bar, and so I wrote this whole story, and then it was contradicted by the major comic book media bloggers at the time, the people like Birth, Movies and Deaths, and all this kind of stuff, who said, no, we've checked all our sources. Rich Johnston is talking absolute nonsense. None of it is true. It's kind of like, well, yeah, and then I have to wait a few years, and then it all comes out, and so that's quite nice. So there's a little bit of that, and it was Nikki Fink who used to do Told You when she used to do it on a Deadline, when would have the exact same kind of story that no one would believe, and then a few months later she would repeat the same story with "told you" in the headline. And we did I can't remember the wording now, but a very, very long-winded version of that that was quite pointed. We don't do it as much these days because maybe I'm a bit more self-confident now. But back then I was definitely trying to fight for space and trying to fight against anyone who would say that what I was writing was nonsense when it wasn't. So those are the ones that I kind of look back on and think, yeah, those are quite big. But they were only big, I think, because everyone said they were wrong. And then they're proved right a few years later. Those ones that will stick in the mind, I guess.
You were talking a minute ago about, creators that you've had a friendly relationship with. What benefit has that given Bleeding Cool? Like, I mean, I'm not saying, hey, who gave you exclusives on stuff, but what positives for Bleeding Cool have come out of relationships with, various comic creators?
Oh, well, I wouldn't have any stories. I mean, it's simple. That's the big thing. I mean, I get stories. I have to get these stories from somehow, and you generally people who want, more people to talk about their stuff or what they're doing, but they're frustrated by the PR system of the companies they work for, or they know something terrible, which has to get out there, and there's no other way, and they can't be associated with it. And so there are certainly, I mean, you look at big stories. I would say something like the Eddie Berganza story, which kind of first broke out on Bleeding Cool before it then went all BuzzFeedy.
That was relating to sexual harassment, right, at DC?
Yes, and there was a certain incident that occurred in the hotel lobby at WonderCon, which I then woke up in the morning to about 8 people emailing me saying, no one else is going to tell you this, Richard, but last night. So those kind of, but you have to have those relationships first. So it's often down to honesty, and it's almost like it's the old frog and the scorpion thing. You can always trust me to be me, if you know what I mean. So a lot of people will put their trust in me, and they'll tell me things on the basis that I won't tell anybody else, and then that's absolutely true. But they also know that if ever anything comes down against them in such a serious way, that friendship won't get in the way. I'll run the story anyway.
Yeah.
So because I'll do that to them, that means I'm more kind of trustworthy in that way, because I'll do it to anybody. I won't let friend or favour affect whether or not I'll run a story if it needs to be told.
Which is probably better than a lot of journalists do these days. You're like, I won't let my personal feelings get in the way of a story.
I have. Well, again, I don't really take the journalist tag because of that kind of thing. But no, there are friends of mine who I have completely screwed over on Bleeding Cool, and then I stab them in the front. They know it's coming, and they've had a chance to comment or whether, or maybe point out maybe I might want to take this into consideration, which I will. I'll always talk to the people, but if whether you give me a story or not, whether you've been a friend, it's still going to be a Bleeding Cool story at some point. So so that includes you as well. But that includes you as well. But I'm sorry, but if I find out that you've not been paying your staff or what you've been doing, I'm sorry, but I'll be running that story.
I shave my kids' heads recreationally, including my daughter's, and they don't like it. And I'll just put that out on Front Street right now. You don't have to run anything. I've already admitted to it.
That's fair enough. Yeah, okay, I could run that.
Damn it! You're about news and rumors and some might say gossip for the comic book space.
I would say gossip. Yes.
There are other sites like yours, like the one that comes to mind for me, because I just left the television industry, is FTV Live. Okay. They're Bleeding Cool for local television, where people send in like memos and like they'll post clips and all that stuff. Do you commiserate with people like that? Other people in other genres? Sometimes it's mostly people on my side. There's I know the people who do Pop Bitch in the UK, and I know the people who do the Guido Fawkes site for politics in the UK. So I kind of know we will hang out occasionally, and yes, we will swap various stories from separate industries, that kind of stuff. But it generally has to involve alcohol at some point. That's the kind of evening. Let's just sit down and just put the world to rights, that kind of thing, and share stories. So it's more of a one-on-one thing rather than an online thing. You mentioned, what was it, Guido Fawkes? I think, don't you do like some editorial cartoons? Guido Fawkes, I do a political cartoon every Monday for Guido Fawkes, which is how I know those guys. And they've got a Christmas dinner coming up soon, which I'll be going to, which should be quite entertaining. And that's when those kind of stories come out. But I know them through Pop Bitch, again, which is someone I also used to do a little bit of writing for, and a bit of editing for years ago. So, but that, again, it's all part of the same kind of sensibility of trying to find those hidden stories. It must be nice to kind of get in a room with people, have some drinks, and just kind of talk shop. Because, I mean, it's a very specific kind of thing that you do.
I think it's probably a little bit more of a British thing. There's more example of that kind of writing in Britain than there is in America. It's much more of a standard here. So that's why I kind of gravitated towards it, because there's just so much more of it here.
Yeah, what's the big one over there? Is it Page 6?
That's
New York, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what I'm thinking of.
Well, I mean, in the tabloids, there's things like the Bazaar column in the Mirror, but in things like the Guardian, there's they've also the Guardian Diary. These things do exist, and they run in either as columns within papers or magazines, or in their very own their own actual thing. I mean, as I mentioned, Pop Pitch, that's one of the bigger ones online, and it has various other competitors, things like Holy Moly over here. So they do exist. Again, there seem to be a bit more prevalence here. I certainly used to read them. Oh, there's magazines, things like Private Eye. I don't know if you know that at all.
I'm not familiar with it.
I have a copy here of the British magazine Private Eye, which is great cartoons and political satire, and also just finding hidden stories. This about politics and media mostly.
It looks there like it's kind of a comic book on the cover. Is that what they do? They kind of put like cartoon balloons on photos, or?
Yeah, well, on the cover there would generally be a photo with a cartoon balloon, and it would be taking the piss out of something that will have happened that week. But mostly it's like text. It's full text and stuff. But this has been running since the 60s in the UK, like really old-fashioned stuff. But it's looking at what's been going on. But this is this is a very popular magazine in the UK. It's been running since the 60s, since the British satire boom then. And that's the kind of stuff that I would have grown up reading.
Yeah.
And wondered why this wasn't happening in comics. I mean, I say that because I've now gone back to some of the fanzines of the 60s and 70s and found that actually, no, there was these kind of things. I hadn't read the Comics Reader, things like that back in the day, but I basically found that was exactly what was being done when I managed to find some old issues, and being written by this guy called Paul Levitz. Now, I have no idea what happened to him. He would be reporting all these gossipy things that he'd heard about comic book creator leaving this title, joining another title, a book being cancelled or not. And I was looking back and thinking, damn, he used to give me so much grief as well back in the day. So much grief. But he was doing exactly what I was doing.
Next time you go to a convention with him, you should just take some copies of those and be like, hey, can you sign this for me?
Absolutely. But I would recommend, if anyone can find copies of these, please do, in some old bins somewhere. But they're much more prevalent in the US, I'm sure, than they are over here. If you can find copies of the Comics Reader from back then, please. And if you find any entertaining columns saying something was happening, either did or didn't happen subsequently, please let me know, because I'd love to know.
So what do you think is going to be the biggest story in comic books in the next year or so? I
have absolutely no idea. I mean, let's look it through. For things like for the Marvels and DCs, I think DC is 5G. There will be a big thing. They're getting rid of all the main characters from their titles and replacing them with new replacements, but not the ones one might have expected. That'll be a big thing for DC, I'm sure. Marvel, well, I guess we're going to find out with incoming. They've got all sorts of interesting storylines. They're going to start trial ballooning from there. I think Al Ewing is being used as a lead for a lot of that stuff. Is going to be very interesting. So I want to see what he's doing. Things like the Masked Raider, all that kind of stuff. I want to see how that's going to grow. I want to see how the Hox Pox books continue and grow. Certainly, the Jonathan Hickman had a massive impact on Marvel this year. Him and Al Ewing have done stuff for Marvel that I don't think people have seen. So I'd like to see how that will progress. But aside from that, I think it's going to be the continual growth of the all ages market in bookstores and book fairs. I think we've just started there, and I don't think a lot of people have really cottoned on to how big that is and how that's going to be. And we're going to see publishers changing their outputs to match that. We started seeing that with the DC Ink and Zoom titles, and I know Marvel are doing a deal with Scholastic. So we're going to see more in that degree. Other things, let me think. Well, those was what I would say would be the biggest stories at the moment.
Let me throw out an idea I see floated around a lot online, and let me get your take on it. Do you think that the comic book and superhero movies are killing the print business, the book business?
No. I think there's lots of other things which are killing the print business, but not specifically Marvel movies or so. I mean, there's a few people who might have. They were just superhero fans. Now they can get a better visceral hit from a movie or a TV show than from a comic book. Mm-hmm. But No, I don't think they're killing. I don't think they're helping. That's one of the things. You don't really get much traffic that comes into comic stores based on the movies.
Yeah,
that does not happen a lot. You do get it when you have very kind of self-contained movies or self-contained comic books that they're based on. So things like Scott Pilgrim and books like Hellboy and indeed Watchmen. They did very well from the movies and the TV shows, but the other not so much. I think it's like we've always had TV, we've always had movies, and we've had comics. It's what's really killing comics, I think, is the internet, because there's much more fun things to do, and for some people, and they're not going to have time to read because they've got more time to scroll. So I think you basically just see, and that's happening to all media. All media is getting squeezed. Comics is also getting squeezed. Maybe comics is less able to survive or react to that kind of squeezing. But I mean, that'd be one interpretation. You could also look at maybe the market's just changing. I mean, certainly I mentioned before, the all ages market has been expanding rapidly for comics, and the YA graphic novels as well start to jump onto the bestseller lists in the USA Today bestseller lists, that kind of thing. So maybe we're just going through another change. Comics always goes through changes. It hasn't been killed off despite a number of people's what seemed like attempts to do so.
Are you familiar with Scott McCloud's idea of the infinite canvas and how online and computers could be used to kind of revolutionize the medium? Yeah,
I see that, and I see some good examples of that as well. I mean, I look at things like the webtoons thing, also the kind of the digital comics that Alex de Campi pioneered with Valentine, where it's all about, like, you see each panel is just like a layer upon a previous panel and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of ideas there. They just have to be used well for storytelling. So you're going to need the people who can tell stories, who can use these kind of different canvases to tell different stories. And yes, the infinite canvas is a great way of doing that. Just have one page that scrolls in whichever direction you wish to go. What's
your opinion on motion comics, where they just basically animate the standard comic book panels?
Well, it's animation. It's a cartoon, and that's okay. I like cartoons as well. It's just a quite limited cartoon, but it's one way of getting them into different people's eyes. Is very good for YouTube, for example. So there are audiences that could be tackled in that way. It's just it's another thing, but you have to have the comic to start with. So that means that's not going anywhere. But I don't think it's a threat.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take it back and close it up here with a little bit more about Bleeding Cool. So, what was it? About 10 years ago you started Bleeding Cool, I think?
10 years, yeah, 10 years ago, about, I think it's something like June 2009. So, yes, 10 years.
Okay, so say a magic genie appears before you, and they're like, okay, the past 10 years are gone. You basically get rebirthed, where they cut out 10 years of your life and you have to start Bleeding Cool over again today. Is there anything you would do differently?
Well, there's certain stores I wouldn't run because they didn't turn out to be true, but that kind of thing. But no, but if we're doing it today in 2019, I have no idea. I can't really. What Bleeding Cool is now is kind of what it's always been. It's not that much of a changing beast. It runs the kind of stories that it runs. It has kind of certain obsessions. So no, I can't really see how I would do it any differently, apart from very specific examples of things where I thought, no, I did that wrong.
Well, let me try and put it a different way. If someone out there was wanting to get together a site like Bleeding Cool about a different genre, obviously, not comic book gossip and rumors, but, if they wanted to reality TV gossip and rumors or whatever, what advice would you give to them about, starting up a business like that today, a blog like that today?
Well, good luck. No, the thing is, it's possible. It's not as hard. You just have to work, and you have to do hard work. It absolutely means putting in the hours, and ridiculous hours. It means 7 days a week, 365 days a year, no Christmas, no holidays. It's that kind of commitment you have to have. Otherwise, it does not work. Or it falls apart, or people drop off. You have to feed the beast. If you're doing that kind of thing, you have an audience, you have to feed them. You have to give them what they want, or give them what they need, or direct them to what they need. And you can't let them go. You don't never, ever treat them for granted. Don't expect just because they were there for you on Friday night, they'll still be there for you on Monday morning. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is about pure graft. And a lot of that, I don't think that always will come across because you don't see how it's being made.
Hey, how do you sort of push yourself like that? How do you keep going, with that passion and everything?
Oh, I don't know. Protestant work ethic? Don't know. It's just, I think it's something, I feel what it is. A lot of it is, it's something I've always liked, and I haven't stopped liking comics and comics culture. That's probably, and I don't know why I still like it, because I mean, surely by now I should be jaded by the whole thing, but I'm not, and I don't know why, and I don't know how to teach that to anybody else. I guess but it's something to watch for, I guess. It hasn't happened yet, but if it does, I'll get quite worried, because then I don't think I can really fake doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. If the passion's not there, then the content's not going to be there, and then the audience is going to go away, and you're down the hole.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, Rich, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great conversation. Where can people? Obviously, they can go to bleedingcool.com.
They can go to bleedingcool.com. They can follow Bleeding Cool at Bleeding Cool on Twitter. They can follow Bleeding Cool on Instagram. They can go to the Bleeding Cool Facebook page. All this stuff is out there, and they're doing their things. I guess you can wish you could. There's a daily thing called the Daily Line in the Gutters, which still runs on Bleeding Cool, which has all the stories from yesterday, all the most read stories from yesterday, and the birthdays from today and the events from today. And that's an emailing list, goes out every morning. I'm trying to think what else. There's a few other little bits and pieces like that. But it keeps going. And you never know what the next big stories are going to be. That's the nice thing. It's always a nice thing to just come along and just find out, because it's always, that's the thing. It's good to know this stuff before everybody else does. Sometimes before the people the stories are actually about, which does happen. So the amount of people I've had. Rich, I didn't know I was fired off my book until you told me. He's like, oh, no, that's not the greatest feeling, but hey.
I didn't want you to find out this way.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you have your own big idea you've made a reality, we want to hear about it. Let us know by emailing imadethis@doanything.media. We'd love to share your project, or maybe even talk to you about it. You can follow the show at I Made This Show, all one word, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, that's at I Made This Show. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or on our website, imadethis.doanything.media. Again, that's imadethis.doanything.media. And if you do subscribe, make sure you leave a review so we can shout you out on the show. I'm Bill Meeks. Thanks for listening.